before we go any further, there is something the War Room needs to address directly and without hesitation. This is the second time in recent weeks that the Mike Trout to Philadelphia narrative has landed on our analytical desk. The same $430 million contract, the same hometown kid angle, the same four-man gauntlet of Turner, Trout, Schwarber, and Harper, the same orthopedic concerns about a 34-year-old outfielder with a documented injury history that spans multiple seasons and multiple structural issues. We covered this ground. We audited every dimension of it with the full forensic treatment it deserves. And our conclusion has not changed, because the underlying mathematics have not changed. The financial exposure is still real. The medical risk is still real. The prospect cost is still real. The luxury tax compression is still real. But here is what has changed, and what makes this second appearance of the Trout rumor significantly more interesting than a simple repeat of the original story. The Phillies are now 2 months deeper into a season that has genuinely deteriorated. The 2-8 stretch we dissected in our Cedric Mullins audit revealed structural outfield failures that internal personnel adjustments have not corrected. Nola's absence from the rotation has stressed the pitching infrastructure. Harper's injury has removed the gravitational center of the batting order. The wild card standings are no longer a comfortable cushion. They are a pressure point. The question is no longer purely hypothetical. It is now urgent. And urgency changes the risk calculus in ways that deserve a completely fresh examination. Let's establish what is different about this conversation compared to where we were when the Trout rumor first surfaced. In April, the Phillies were 4 games into a season that had produced 1 win and 3 losses. The sample size was microscopic. The organizational patience was still intact. The Harper and Nola injuries had not yet materialized. The outfield deficit, while identifiable in projections, had not yet accumulated the kind of sustained, documented failure that forces a front office into emergency decision-making mode. That was then. This is now. And now. The context surrounding every high-risk acquisition conversation has shifted fundamentally. A team that was theoretically built to absorb a slow start and self-correct over the natural arc of a long season has instead accelerated downward. The losses are stacking. The production gaps are confirmed by months of evidence rather than weeks of projection. The window that Dombrowski built his roster to exploit is not shrinking in some distant, future tense way. It is shrinking right now, in real time, with every game that goes into the loss column while the division leaders continue playing baseball. In that context, the appetite for risk increases. It has to, because the alternative to accepting risk at this stage of the season is accepting the probability of a failed championship window. And for an organization with this financial commitment and this competitive pedigree, that outcome is categorically unacceptable. So let's rebuild the Trout audit from the ground up with fresh eyes and current stakes. The offensive case for this acquisition has only become more compelling as the season has progressed. The outfield production deficit that existed in April as a projection has now been confirmed by sustained real-world evidence. The Adolis Garcia experiment has not delivered the middle-order power and multi-dimensional threat profile that the front office projected when that move was made. The lineup, without Harper operating at full capacity and without consistent outfield production supplementing the veteran core, has lost the suffocating offensive identity that makes opposing pitching coordinators lose sleep. Insert Mike Trout into that construction, and the transformation is immediate and measurable, not theoretical. The Turner, Trout, Schwarber, Harper sequence in the batting order creates a problem that no pitching staff in this league can solve with conventional strategy. You cannot pitch around one of those hitters without creating a favorable count for the next one. You cannot shade your defensive positioning for one profile without opening vulnerabilities against the adjacent profiles. You cannot sequence your bullpen usage to neutralize one threat without burning leverage arms that the next threat will immediately exploit. That lineup construction does not just generate runs. It generates behavioral changes in opposing managers that create downstream advantages across every game those 4 hitters play together. It is offensive force multiplication, and the Phillies need exactly that right now. But the medical file does not get softer just because the organizational urgency gets louder. And this is where the audit demands complete honesty regardless of how much the fantasy appeals to every competitive instinct in the building. Mike Trout is 34 years old. His injury chronicle across the last several seasons represents a pattern, not a series of isolated incidents. Calf complications, back issues, a fractured hamate. These are the kinds of structural and soft tissue concerns that do not simply resolve with age and additional mileage. They accumulate. They create compensatory movement patterns that introduce new vulnerability points. They establish a physical reality that no amount of organizational optimism or medical staff expertise can fully wish away. Last season's 130 games was the most encouraging health development in years. Acknowledge that fully and honestly. But one productive health season does not erase the pattern that preceded it, and it does not answer the specific question that matters most in this conversation. Can a 34-year-old Mike Trout, absorbing the physical demands of a pennant race and a postseason run, deliver the availability that justifies the financial and prospect cost of acquiring him? The honest answer is that nobody knows. And in corporate risk management, when the financial exposure reaches a scale that this acquisition demands, and the honest answer to the durability question is that nobody knows, the decision-making framework requires extraordinary discipline to avoid letting the emotional urgency of the moment override the analytical clarity that the situation demands. The financial guillotine has not moved. $430 million. Whatever portion the Angels absorb in a trade scenario still leaves the Phillies holding an obligation that collides with their existing luxury tax reality in ways that compress every subsequent roster decision for the duration of the contract. Here is a dimension of that compression that does not always get the attention it deserves in these trade conversations. The Phillies are not just making a decision about 2026. They are making a decision about 2027, 2028, and every year beyond that where Trout's contract remains on the books. The players currently on this roster who will reach arbitration or free agency during that period, Alec Bohm being the most immediate example, face a front office operating with reduced flexibility because a significant portion of the available financial resources are already committed to a player who may or may not be delivering value commensurate with that commitment. Championship windows are not just about the peak year. They are about the sustained period during which a roster remains competitive enough to make October baseball a realistic expectation. Financial decisions that maximize one specific season at the cost of organizational flexibility in subsequent seasons can shorten a window even when they are made with the explicit intention of extending it. Dombrowski understands this tension better than almost anyone in the industry. He has lived it on multiple rosters throughout his career. The question is whether the current urgency of the specific moment overrides the long-term structural discipline that has defined his best organizational work. The prospect cost dimension deserves fresh examination given the current state of the Phillies farm system. The Angels are not trading Mike Trout for organizational filler at any point in this negotiation, regardless of how motivated they are to move his contract and accelerate their rebuild. The return package has to reflect the caliber of the player being moved, and that means the Phillies' best remaining developmental assets leave the building as part of this deal. Those assets are not just abstract future value sitting in a spreadsheet. They are the organizational insurance policy that protects this franchise when the veteran core contracts begin their inevitable decline phase. They are the cost control contributors who allow the front office to maintain competitive payroll construction even as the big money commitments age. Depleting that insurance policy for a high-risk, high-reward rental on a player with Trout's injury history and contract structure is a decision with consequences that extend well beyond the season's standings. Here is where the war room lands after the full forensic treatment. The case for Mike Trout in Philadelphia is real, emotionally resonant, and tactically compelling in ways that deserve genuine respect. The lineup construction argument is legitimate. The urgency of the current competitive situation is undeniable. The hometown narrative, while not a baseball argument, reflects a genuine alignment between player desire and organizational need that can be a meaningful factor in trade negotiations. But the case against is equally real, financially documented, medically supported, and organizationally consequential in ways that do not disappear because the standings are uncomfortable. The luxury tax compression is real. The injury pattern is real. The prospect cost is real. The long-term flexibility sacrifice is real. This is the most difficult kind of executive decision, the kind where both the argument for action and the argument for restraint are built on legitimate, defensible logic rather than one side being obviously correct and the other obviously reckless. Where Dombrowski ultimately lands on this decision will reveal everything about how this front office defines its primary obligation, to the specific season's championship probability or to the sustained organizational health that keeps the Phillies competitive when the current contracts age out. The whiteboard is yours. Drop your full executive analysis in the comments. Has the deterioration of the season changed your verdict on the Trout acquisition risk? Or does the financial and medical exposure remain a hard stop regardless of competitive urgency? Bring your most ruthless reasoning. Hammer that like button for the deep analytical work this channel delivers every time. Lock in your subscription, because the trade deadline is approaching and the decisions are only going to get bigger from here. The War Room never closes.